A major royal scandal is now erupting into full public view, and the details emerging are nothing short of explosive. Prince William has allegedly uncovered and directly confronted a covert arrangement inside the palace, in which Queen Camilla demanded significant personal assets and property guarantees from King Charles himself. This is not a minor disagreement over household matters or a routine discussion of future living arrangements. According to the account now circulating, Camilla sought formal transfer or lifelong exclusive rights to certain royal residences, along with associated assets, plus a substantial independent financial settlement. The goal, as reported, was clear: to ensure that after Charles's death, she could live completely free of interference and avoid any conflict or dependency once William becomes king. The core of the demand centers on securing her position outside the traditional machinery of the monarchy. Camilla reportedly pushed for these guarantees so that no trouble would arise under William's eventual reign. She wanted to lock in the ability to lead a fully independent life, free from the constraints and potential disputes that could come with a new sovereign. In the emerging narrative, this was framed not as an open family conversation, but as a private negotiation designed to protect her future interests before any transition of power took place. The idea was to settle the question of property and financial independence while Charles was still on the throne, removing any possibility of later disagreements that might complicate William's early days as king. To advance this plan, Camilla is said to have secretly hired a private lawyer who was brought inside palace circles. This lawyer worked on the legal paperwork and private agreements away from the normal royal channels that usually handle such sensitive matters. The presence of an outside legal figure operating within the palace walls has already raised serious questions about protocol and security. How did this arrangement remain hidden for as long as it did? Who approved access? And what documents were actually being prepared? These are the questions now being asked as the story gains traction. William's discovery of the arrangement marks the turning point. He is reported to have confronted Camilla directly and learned the full scope of what she was negotiating with Charles. What began as a private palace discussion has now been brought into the open by the heir to the throne himself. By making the matter public, William has transformed a closed-door negotiation into a rapidly escalating controversy that touches on trust, authority, and the future shape of the monarchy. The timing could hardly be more sensitive. Discussions about how the institution will function under William have already been underway, and this episode is being framed as a direct test of his willingness to confront difficult family matters head-on before he ascends the throne. Princess Anne has issued a pointed public comment on the affair. She stressed the need for transparency, unity within the family, and proper constitutional handling of any post-reign arrangements, rather than secret side deals. Her intervention adds weight to the growing sense that this is no longer a private family issue. When a senior working royal of Anne's stature speaks in these terms, it signals that the matter has moved beyond internal management and into the realm of institutional credibility. Further details continue to fuel the story. Questions are being raised about whether the private lawyer's presence inside the palace breached established norms. Speculation is growing over exactly which properties and assets were on the table, and whether Charles had already begun any informal commitments. Courtiers and palace insiders are said to be divided. Some defend Camilla's right to secure her future after decades of public life alongside the king. Others view the secrecy itself as a serious breach of trust that undermines the collective responsibility expected within the royal household. The episode is already being positioned as a defining moment for William's authority. Public and media reaction is intensifying, and the narrative is shifting from private royal business into a full-blown question of how the monarchy handles transitions of power and personal interests. What makes this particularly striking is the way the demand was structured. It was not simply a request for continued residence or standard provisions that have historically been made for Queen's consort. The reported push for formal transfer or lifelong exclusive rights, combined with a substantial independent settlement, suggests deliberate effort to create a separate sphere of financial and residential security. In the account now circulating, this was intended to eliminate any future leverage or dependency once William took the throne. The private lawyer's role was central to formalizing those arrangements outside the usual advisory processes that would normally involve the wider family and institutional lawyers. As more elements of the story surface, the focus remains on the confrontation itself. William's decision to bring the matter into the open rather than contain it has changed the dynamic completely. What might have remained an internal negotiation has become public controversy, complete with commentary from other senior royals and growing scrutiny from outside the palace walls. The coming days are likely to bring further details about the specific residences and assets under discussion, the nature of any draft agreements, and the precise sequence of events that led William to intervene. For now, the central facts of the emerging account are clear: a demand for property and financial independence, a private lawyer operating inside the palace, a direct confrontation, and a public airing that has placed the entire episode under intense examination. The private lawyer's involvement continues to draw the sharpest scrutiny. According to the emerging account, this individual was not a long-standing royal counsel, but an outside professional brought in specifically for the property and settlement discussions. Access was arranged through channels that bypassed the usual layers of palace legal oversight, allowing draft documents and private correspondence to move forward with limited visibility. That level of operational secrecy inside an institution that prides itself on controlled processes has left many observers questioning how such an arrangement could proceed without earlier detection. Security protocols, visitor logs, and the simple matter of who authorized the lawyer's presence are now subjects of intense interest. The fact that the work was conducted within palace circles rather than at an external office only heightens the sense that deliberate steps were taken to keep the negotiations contained. Speculation over the exact properties and assets in question has grown steadily. Reports circulating among those following the story point toward residences that have historically carried both practical and symbolic weight within the royal estate. The demand for formal transfer or lifelong exclusive rights, rather than the more common arrangements of continued occupancy or grace and favor status, suggests an intention to place certain holdings beyond the reach of future sovereign decisions. Alongside the residential element sits the reported push for a substantial independent financial settlement. Taken together, these elements form a package designed to create a clear separation between Camilla's post-reign life and the institutional resources that would fall under William's authority. Whether any informal commitments had already been made by Charles remains one of the most closely watched aspects of the story. If preliminary understandings existed, they would add another layer of complexity to the confrontation that followed. The division among courtiers and palace insiders reflects the deeper tensions at play. On one side are those who argue that a queen consort who has shared decades of public duty has every right to seek clarity and security for the years ahead. They frame the negotiations as a practical response to the realities of succession, rather than an act of overreach. On the other side stand those who see the secrecy itself as the central problem. In their view, any arrangement of this magnitude should have been handled through established constitutional and family channels, with full awareness among the senior members of the household. The decision to operate through a private lawyer inside the palace is regarded by this group as a breach of the collective trust that the institution relies upon. That split in opinion is already shaping how the episode is discussed within royal circles and beyond. William's decision to confront the matter directly and then allow it to enter the public domain has been interpreted as a deliberate assertion of authority. By refusing to keep the discussion entirely private, he has signaled that issues of this nature will not be managed solely behind closed doors when they touch on the future integrity of the monarchy. The timing adds further weight. Conversations about the shape of the institution under the next reign have been ongoing, covering everything from the size of the working royal family to the management of royal properties and the balance between personal and public interests. Into that already sensitive environment comes a story of secret negotiations, private legal counsel, and a demand for assets that could affect the resources available to the future king. The episode is therefore being read not only as a family dispute, but as an early test of how William intends to handle challenges to the transparency and cohesion of the household. Princess Anne's public comment has reinforced the institutional dimension of the controversy. Her emphasis on transparency, family unity, and proper constitutional handling, rather than secret side deals, has been taken as a clear statement of principle. Anne occupies a unique position as a senior working royal with decades of experience and a reputation for straightforwardness. When she speaks in these terms, the message carries beyond the immediate circle of the King and the Prince of Wales. It underscores that the matter is no longer viewed as a private arrangement between Camilla and Charles, but as something that affects the credibility of the institution as a whole. Her intervention has also encouraged wider discussion about the processes that should govern any future provisions for members of the family once a reign ends. Public and media reaction has intensified in response to these developments. What began as reports of a private palace negotiation has expanded into a broader examination of trust, succession planning, and the boundaries between personal security and institutional responsibility. Commentators are examining how previous transitions of power were managed, how assets and residences have historically been allocated, and whether the current episode reveals gaps in the informal understandings that have long guided royal practice. The story's shift from internal business to institutional credibility issue is now well advanced. Each new detail about the lawyer's role, the nature of the demands, and the sequence of the confrontation adds fuel to an already active public conversation. The coming phase of scrutiny is likely to focus on the practical consequences. If formal documents were drafted, their status will matter. If informal commitments were made, their weight in any future discussions will be tested. The balance between Camilla's desire for an independent life after Charles and the need for clear, transparent handling of royal assets under the next sovereign sits at the heart of the tension. William's public airing of the matter has ensured that these questions will not be resolved quietly. The controversy continues to gather momentum, drawing in voices from within the family, from palace circles, and from the wider public that has long followed the workings of the monarchy monarchy with close attention. The institutional stakes have become impossible to ignore. What started as a private negotiation over property and financial independence has evolved into a public examination of how the monarchy manages the personal interests of its most senior members during a period of transition. The reported demand for formal transfer or lifelong exclusive rights to certain residences, combined with a substantial independent settlement, has forced a wider conversation about the boundary between legitimate personal security and arrangements that could limit the options available to a future sovereign. William's choice to bring the matter into the open has ensured that this conversation cannot be deferred or contained within palace walls. The division among those closest to the institution continues to illustrate the difficulty of the moment. Defenders of Camilla's position argue that decades of public service entitle her to clarity and protection once Charles is no longer on the throne. They see the negotiations as a practical step rather than an act of self-interest. Critics counter that the method itself, the private lawyer operating inside the palace, the limited visibility, absence of broader family consultation, undermines the very cohesion the monarchy depends upon. That disagreement is no longer theoretical. It is shaping how the episode is discussed, both inside royal circles and in the wider public sphere. And it places additional pressure on William to demonstrate that future decisions of this magnitude will follow transparent and collective processes. Princess Anne's intervention remains one of the most significant markers of the story's seriousness. By stressing transparency, unity, and proper constitutional handling over secret side deals, she has framed the issue as one of institutional principle rather than personal grievance. Her comments have encouraged others to consider the longer-term implications. If arrangements of this kind can be advanced through private channels without full awareness among senior working royals, what does that mean for the management of other sensitive matters as the reign changes hands? The question is now part of the public record, and it will not disappear simply because the immediate confrontation has occurred. Public reaction has moved beyond curiosity into sustained scrutiny. The story is no longer treated as exclusive royal gossip. It is examined as a test of credibility for an institution that must continually justify its place in national life. Viewers and readers are asking how such negotiations remained hidden, what the precise assets under discussion actually were, and whether any informal understandings between Charles and Camilla will now require formal clarification. Media coverage has expanded to include analysis of historical precedents for the provision of former queen's consort, the legal status of royal residences, and the practical challenges of separating personal and public resources. Each new layer of detail reinforces the sense that a private palace matter has become a broader institutional question. The timing continues to amplify the impact. Discussions about the future size and shape of the working monarchy, the allocation of properties, and the balance between personal independence and collective responsibility were already underway. Into that environment comes an episode that appears to place personal security above transparent process. William's response, confrontation followed by public airing, has been read by many as an early indication of the style of leadership he intends to exercise. Whether that response ultimately strengthens confidence in the transition or opens further divisions remains to be seen. But the fact of the public exposure itself has already altered the landscape. As the story develops, attention will turn to practical outcomes. Will the reported demands be formally withdrawn or renegotiated under fuller scrutiny? Will protocols governing outside legal advice inside the palace be reviewed? How will the senior members of the family restore a sense of shared purpose after a period of revealed secrecy? These questions now sit alongside the original facts of the emerging account: the demand for property rights and financial independence, the private lawyer, the confrontation, the public revelation, and the pointed comments from Princess Anne. Together they form a single continuous narrative of a monarchy being tested at a sensitive moment in its history. The coming weeks are likely to bring further revelations and sharper debate. What remains clear is that the quiet management of personal arrangements behind palace doors has given way to a public accounting that reaches far beyond the individuals directly involved. The credibility of the institution, the authority of the heir, and the principles that will guide the next reign are all now part of the discussion. This is no longer simply a story about one queen consort seeking security. It is a story about how a centuries-old institution handles power, transparency, and trust when the future is already pressing in. What do you make of William's decision to bring this into the open? Do you see Camilla's reported demands as a reasonable step toward independence, or a breach of the collective responsibility expected within the royal family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to stay updated as new details emerge on this developing royal story, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. The full implications of this episode are still unfolding, and the conversation is far from over.